Hello, everyone. Tonight, we are stepping into the slow, sticky warmth of ancient Ethiopia, where the sun paints the hills gold and bees hum like distant gossip. There's smoke in the air dust underfoot and the faint but sweet tang of something bubbling in the back of a clay pot. It's not wine as you know it. It's not mead, not quite. It's something older, fuzzier, and much more stubborn. And yes, it might knock you flat if you're not careful. You probably won't survive this, at least not if you try to drink what they're drinking the way they're drinking it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is over there. I always enjoy seeing who's awake with me around the world. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get down to business tonight. I'm dragging my feet through a ridge where the land blurs between scrub and mountain. Somewhere in what you'd call the Horn of Africa, long before borders became arguments, and towns got their own TikTok filters. There's a gathering of huts clumped around a low valley. That's where the story begins. Or maybe it began even earlier with bees. The air's thick with them. I wave one off, and it doesn't care. Around me, half a dozen villagers, barefoot. Leather-wrapped, sunburned, poke long sticks into tree hollows, coaxing bees out with a smoke bundle tied to a forked branch. Their honeypots are gourd-shaped and stained a sticky amber. There's no ceremony to it, no quiet reverence, just fast hands, quiet chuckles. And one guy who's already tasted too much of the goods and is now muttering apologies to a stump he thinks is his cousin. The clay jars they use are beautiful in a rugged way, thick-lipped, streaked with soot, and sealed with something that smells faintly of crushed mint. They carry them like treasure and talk to them like pets. And while I crouch beside one of the older women, I notice she's tracing a pattern into the dirt with her pinky finger. A swirl, then a cross, then a triangle. For the bees, she says softly, so they come back. Historians still debate whether early Ethiopian communities actively cultivated bees or simply followed them from tree to tree like awkward honey-addicted stalkers. But either way, it worked. They learned fast that if you collect honey, leave it somewhere warm and undisturbed, and wait long enough, something happens. The air bubbles. The jar hisses softly. The liquid turns sharper, funkier. And your cousin starts apologizing to a tree stump. Now back to those jars. The villagers keep them half buried in sun-warmed sand, a method that, believe it or not, keeps them at a stable temperature. One woman tells me it's the breath of the earth doing the brewing. Another says it's the devil's belly. One of them is probably right. But honestly, if you've ever sipped something that tastes like honey and regret, you'll understand why they weren't too picky about definitions. I follow a few of the younger men as they carry 2 full jars to a platform made of flat stone. They set them down carefully and step back. One of them claps 3 times. Another mumbles something that sounds like "no sour spirits, please." And then they just sit, watching, waiting, as if the jars might sing. I try to peek inside, but one of them taps me on the forehead and whispers, "Too eager, too early. Let the bee's memory rest." Okay then, here's a fun, slightly horrifying fact. Some early Ethiopian brews were believed to carry memories of the bees of the people of the hills. Drink too much, and you might dream someone else's dream. Or worse, you might remember something you didn't know you forgot. Now, whether that's ancient psychology, fermentation, paranoia, or a warning about the world's most powerful hangover, historians still debate. But I kind of love that idea, that the jar holds more than just liquid. It holds time, intention, maybe even mischief. Someone hands me a cup carved from horn. The surface is sticky, and I pretend not to notice the bee wing floating in the liquid. The smell is a mix of rotten fruit and warm flowers. It's not awful, not great, but definitely not water. I sip. It burns, then cools, then settles somewhere behind my eyes and makes me forget what I was about to say. A woman across from me laughs so hard she drops her stick. I think she's laughing at my face, or maybe at the bee wing I'm trying not to swallow. That night, as the sun bleeds out behind the hill, the villagers gather around a low fire. Someone starts humming. Someone else bangs two sticks together in a rhythm that's both irregular and somehow hypnotic. And the honey wine, or tiege as they'll one day call it, makes its rounds again. There's a child asleep under a goat. There's a man snoring into his own drum. And there's me flat on my back, watching a bee crawl across the moon. Whatever this drink is, it isn't just alcohol. It's a slow fuse tied to memory and madness. A whisper of wildflowers and fermentation. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of the oldest recipe that still gets people buzzed, literally. The fire's still warm when I wake up. My mouth tastes like old flowers and mystery. I sit up slowly brushing off dust and the tiniest ant climbing my shirt like it owns me. Around the circle, a few early risers poke at the embers, scooping glowing coals into small pottery bowls they carry like soup. One woman, short, broad-shouldered, with hands that look like they've wrestled mountains, grabs my arm without a word and pulls me along a path of packed earth. She doesn't introduce herself, but her smile is slightly crooked, as if she's always half amused by how slow the rest of us are. We arrive at a kind of hut. No door, just a curtain of hanging reeds. Inside, the air is thick with smoke and something sharp and sweet. In the corner, two big jars sit close to a low fire pit, the kind that smolders rather than burns. She points at them and grunts. I grunt back, unsure of the etiquette. She lifts the lid from one of the jars, and that's when I realize this is where the accidents happen. The story goes, if you ask around enough and bribe someone with a particularly juicy mango, that the first honey wine wasn't brewed with purpose. Someone left a pot of diluted honey too close to a fire pit. The heat warmed it just enough. Wild yeast drifted in like an uninvited party guest, and when they came back to it days later, the liquid had changed. It smelled funny, tasted sharper, and it made their cousin think he was a bird. Historians still debate whether this was intentional fermentation or just one of humanity's better accidents, right up there with the guy who ate the first cooked oyster and the one who realized goats can give milk. But I like to think it was both. A mistake someone decided to repeat. Curiosity fermented into tradition. The woman, let's call her Tiriki, because she kind of looks like someone named Tiri, starts scooping honey into a clay bowl. Thick, amber, sticky stuff that clings to her fingers like slow lava. She adds water from a skin bag, stirs it with a carved stick, then pours it into a wide jar. Not all the way, maybe halfway. Room for bubbles, she says with a wink. Then comes the part that feels less like brewing and more like casting a spell. She crumbles a lump of something dry into the jar. I lean in. Dried bark. Bits of fruit rind. Maybe even a flower petal or two. She mutters, as she does it, not words I understand, but the tone is serious, reverent. Each one for a different taste, she says finally. And a different kind of dream. A small joke, I think. But I notice she looks at the fire after she says it, just briefly. This is where it gets weird. She places the jar beside the fire pit, not over it. Then takes a flat stone and blocks most of the fire's breath so it doesn't get too hot. Just warm, like the belly of a sleeping animal. She hums a little tune, wipes her hands on her wrap, and walks out, leaving me alone with the bubbling beast. The warmth from the fire, the thickness of the jar, and the wild yeast drifting lazily in the hut That's the combo, the holy trinity of proto-winemaking. And I'm sitting in the middle of it, watching foam form around the edge of the mixture like it's thinking about becoming alive. A fly lands on the lip of the jar, takes a sip, dies instantly. Okay, not really. It flies off smug. Now, here's the odd part. Thierry returns holding what looks like a small ball of mashed berries and ash. She drops it into the mix. I raise my eyebrows. She shrugs. Starter, she says. From the last jar. Makes the new one remember. This isn't just poetic. It's science. Sort of. They're essentially using the dregs of the last successful fermentation to jumpstart the next one. The yeast and microbes still living in the leftover mash are strong already adapted, so the new batch gets a head start. This technique shows up in cultures all over the ancient world, though here it's done with the flair of someone feeding a household spirit. They're not just brewing, they're feeding memory. And yet, even with all this ritual and rhythm, failure's still part of the game. Some jars go sour, some explode. One poor kid tried brewing in a carved-out gourd and ended up with a sticky ceiling and a very loud mother. I hear Thierry chuckling as she tells me that story. Her hands are blackened with soot, and she pulls out a chunk of charcoal to mark a tiny symbol on the side of the jar. It looks like a bird with its wings out. I ask what it means. Means I'll remember which one was yours, she says, in case it kills someone. Again, probably a joke. We spend the next few hours gathering more honey. It's dangerous, messy work. You wear layers, not for warmth, but to avoid being stung where it counts. The bees are surprisingly chill until they're not. I get stung once on the wrist. Thierry says that's lucky. I say it hurts. By the time we're back in the hut, the jar is already whispering to itself. Little fizz sounds like secrets being shared through soup bubbles. The surface is cloudier. There's a smell now, sweet-sour, a little yeasty, like wet bread and blooming flowers in a fight. Thierry leans down and listens to the jar, then nods. She's started. I nod too, because it feels right, like a creature's been born. One that can't walk or talk, but can make you forget your name and remember your grandmother's laugh in the same sip. As the sun sets again, I'm left alone with the fire and the jars, watching them breathe. I think about how this whole process, this accident-turned tradition, was born not from technology or conquest, but from a moment of laziness or luck. From someone who forgot a pot too close to the fire. And maybe that's how most of human history happened, one forgetful genius at a time. The next morning, or whatever you want to call, the moment when the sky turns a warm apricot color and roosters start yelling without permission, I follow the sound of flutes. Not polished flutes, more like hollow reeds someone punched holes into while bored, but they make music all the same, drifting through the air like a breeze with rhythm. I wander past the honey jars, now bubbling happily, like gossiping old women, and make my way toward the center of the village where a small crowd is gathering. People are dressed in their best wraps necklaces made of bone shells and dried flowers. A few have painted dots and lines on their faces, white and red, maybe to ward off evil, or maybe just to impress someone cute. At the front, a man wearing a headdress of feathers and what looks suspiciously like a bee's nest stands on a stone slab. His arms are spread wide. His grin is slightly unhinged. This is the priest. He doesn't speak so much as chant. His voice rolls over the crowd in waves, and someone behind me taps a drum softly. A young girl carries a clay jar forward, one of the new ones warm and fizzing, and places it before him like an offering. Steam escapes the narrow mouth. A small hush falls over the crowd. This is not just a village tradition. It's a spiritual one. Honey wine here is more than a drink. It's a conversation with God's ancestors' nature, and sometimes disappointingly, your own bad decisions. The priest dips a carved spoon into the jar and lifts it high. The liquid runs down in thick amber ribbons. He takes a sip, then another, then smacks his lips and declares something I can't quite understand. But the villagers cheer. Apparently, the gods approve. He passes the jar to his left. And like that, the circle begins. Each person drinks, smiles, murmurs thanks. When it reaches me, the warmth of it seeps through the horn cup before I even raise it. I take a cautious sip. It's different now, sharper than the first batch I tasted. The honey is still there, but it's mellowed. The sourness is rounder. The fizz more pronounced. It dances on the tongue like it's trying to tell a joke it forgot halfway through. Here's the twist. This entire event isn't just about drinking. It's about connecting. Each jar has a story. Each brew is given a name. The one we're drinking now, Storm Whispers, apparently brewed during a lightning storm, and locals say it helps you dream of flying goats. Yes, flying goats. Historians still debate whether these early Ethiopian rituals were strictly religious or more socially medicinal. Some argue the wine helped open the spirit gate, while others think it was just a really good excuse for a community-wide nap. Either way, it worked. People felt something, and that something often led to singing. Oh, the singing. Raspy and imperfect and absolutely sincere. A woman belts out a tune about a bee that lost its way and ended up in love with a river fish. It's tragic. It's oddly catchy. Someone joins in with a beat made from smacking a bowl. Soon everyone is clapping or humming or swaying, including me. I'd love to say, the honey wine makes me a better dancer. It doesn't, but it does make me care less. The priest now circles the crowd, shaking a rattle made of dried pods and whispering blessings. Or maybe just reminding people not to overdo it. He stops in front of a man who's clearly had more than one sip and mutters something in his ear. The man blinks, nods, and slowly puts his cup down. Apparently, that's their version of your cut off. Odd fact, in some versions of these ceremonies, bees themselves were involved, not just in the making of the wine, but in the rituals. One elder tells me that during a particularly sacred offering, a hive was kept near the ceremonial jar. If the bees swarmed it, it was a sign of favor. If they ignored it, time to try again next season. Now that's high-stakes fermentation. The sun climbs higher, and the celebration turns softer. People stretch out on woven mats. Someone begins braiding another's hair. A child tries to drink from an empty jar and gets scolded. I sit under a fig tree, head slightly buzzing, eyes half-lidded, and listen to the hum of the day winding down. In my lap is a small cup of a different honey brew, darker in color, spicier in smell. This one's called Night Teeth, made with a bark that makes your tongue tingle and your dreams come in color. Thierry hands it to me with a wink. Only sip, or you'll talk to trees. Noted. I take a tiny taste. It's electric, not hot, but alive. My lips feel fizzy. The ground tilts just slightly. Or maybe I tilt. It's hard to tell. Here's what I love most about this place, about this tradition. It's not just about getting drunk. It's about the process, the waiting, the sharing, the idea that something sweet and simple, honey and water, can become something wild and mysterious with just time and care. And maybe a priest who wears a beehive on his head. As the sky turns golden again, I watch two goats chase each other around the now empty jars. One knocks over a bowl. No one cares. The people here have perfected the art of patience. of listening to the earth, of trusting the process even when it bubbles over or stings you on the nose. So I lie back, the taste of night teeth still clinging to my tongue, and let the hum of bees lull me into the kind of sleep that comes only after drinking something sacred fermented and just slightly terrifying. There's a goat dancing on the roof. At first, I think I'm still dreaming. But no, there it is, hooves tapping a rhythm that no one else seems to hear. Its little legs bounce like springs, eyes wild, and mouth chewing on something invisible. Around it, a few other goats prance in circles, occasionally pausing to butt heads or leap into the air, like they're auditioning for a musical. I sit up slowly, rubbing my eyes, and trying to remember what was in that night teeth batch. But as I glance around the village, I realize I'm not the only one watching. A group of elders sits on a stone bench, nodding solemnly at the goat ballet. One of them even claps. This is not a fluke. This is a thing. Turns out there's a story behind it. Actually, more than one. One theory goes like this: goats discovered the joy of fermentation. Long before we did, they'd nibble on overripe fruit or berries left in the sun too long, and suddenly start hopping around like toddlers on espresso. The people noticed, laughed, and eventually followed their lead. Historians still debate whether the dancing goats of Ethiopia were the true inspiration behind early mead and even coffee. Yes, coffee. But that's a different sleep story. Today we're talking about honey wine, and let me tell you, those goats are committed. One man barefoot tall, with a forehead that looks carved from tree bark, points to the rooftop dancer and says, "That one's on the good stuff." I don't ask what the good stuff means. I already know. Thierry appears beside me, holding 2 cups, and that crooked grin of hers. She hands me one still warm and smells faintly of cinnamon and roasted something. "Goat wine," she says and winks. I raise an eyebrow. She doesn't explain. The taste is different, earthier, less sweet. There's a smoky depth to it that makes me think of moss and sun-baked clay. It coats the tongue like it's laying down carpet. The aftertaste hums. "This one's made near the cliffs," she explains. "Drier air, different bees, angry bees." I look down at my cup. Angry bees. She shrugs. "They sting the flowers harder, makes the honey bolder." Science maybe. Poetry. Absolutely. As we sip and watch the goats perform interpretive dance, I start to notice how the villagers are mimicking them. Light steps, quick turns, playful shoves. It's not just a reaction to the drink. It's part of the ritual, a kind of joyful madness. They call it nakati, which loosely translates to "when the spirit hops." There's no shame in it, no embarrassment, just movement and laughter. One woman, probably in her 70s, is spinning with a child on her back. Her hair flies in tangled strands, and she laughs so hard she nearly drops her cup. A man nearby flings his hands in the air, shouting a poem about bees falling in love with sunflowers. No one bats an eye. The honey wine doesn't just lower inhibitions, it connects. Past and present. Elders and toddlers. Human and goat. The line between sense and nonsense becomes wonderfully blurry, and in this blur, another story is told. It's about a man who once drank from a sacred jar meant only for the gods. They say he grew wings, not literal ones, obviously, but he climbed a hill and leapt arms wide, certain he'd fly. He didn't, but his spirit, they say, never came back down. That jar was sealed and buried. A warning, a blessing, maybe both. I ask Thierry if the story's true. She chuckles. "We buried a jar. That part's true." She won't say more. Odd fact of the day, some early Ethiopian brewers believed that certain jars could become possessed if left too long. The bubbles inside were thought to be spirits trying to escape. If a jar hissed at you When unsealed, it meant the drink was too alive. And usually someone else was asked to taste it first. I volunteer not to be that person. Back to the goats. One of them climbs down from the roof and begins headbutting a jar. Not aggressively, more like it's trying to get its attention. A boy rushes over, gently guides it away, and whispers, "Not yet." It's still thinking. Apparently, fermentation requires privacy. I wander to the edge of the village where a few jars are kept in a rock alcove cooler and shaded. Each is wrapped in woven reeds, labeled not with writing, but with symbols sunmoon fishfoot. I ask what they mean. "Dreams," says a man with silver streaks in his beard. Each jar gives a different kind. He taps one with a feather symbol. This one flying dreams, and the goat dreams. He laughs. That's not a jar, that's bad decisions. As the day stretches on, the dancing slows. People rest in the shade, heads on each other's shoulders. A few sing softly lullabies for no one in particular. I sit with my empty cup, watching bees swirl lazily in the warm air. The villagers believe bees carry messages, that when you sleep after drinking their wine, the bees come to your dreams. Sometimes with warnings, sometimes with jokes. One man swears a bee once told him to marry the baker's daughter. He did. She makes excellent flatbread, so maybe the bee knew something. I can't tell if I'm buzzed from the drink or the company, probably both. But I do know one thing. The goats, they're still dancing, and I'm starting to wonder if they know something we don't. By the time the sun starts to stretch long shadows across the village paths, I've learned one crucial thing. If your jar isn't sealed properly, you're not just making bad wine. You're inviting trouble. I'm crouched beside a slow-moving river, watching Thierry dig her fingers into the mud like she's searching for buried treasure. Beside her sits a wide clay jar, half filled with a thick golden mixture of honey and herbs, and 3 flat stones that look like they've been through at least one argument with a goat. Today, I'm learning the art of sealing. Thierry slaps a chunk of wet mud against the mouth of the jar and begins patting it smooth. Then she sprinkles something over the seal-crushed leaves. I think maybe eucalyptus. The smell is sharp and almost minty. "Keeps the demons out," she says casually, like she's swatting away mosquitoes. I raise an eyebrow. "Also flies," she adds with a grin. The sealing process is serious business. If you leave a jar exposed, oxygen gets in. And oxygen, as I've learned, is like an overly eager party guest. It turns your sweet, bubbly mix into a sour, flat mess. Or worse, it spoils the whole batch. And in a village where honey is basically gold, that's not just a minor inconvenience. That's a scandal. Odd fact. Some villagers believe a poorly sealed jar can curse your next batch, like the bad vibes carry over. So they don't just clean the jars, they bless them. Whisper to them, rub river stones over the clay, like they're soothing a fever. Thierry places a woven reed basket over the sealed mouth, then ties it with a thin strip of hide. "Now we wait," she says, "and hope the moon likes us this time." Apparently, lunar phases matter. Historians still debate whether ancient brewers actually followed the moon for fermentation schedules or whether it was more superstition than science. But honestly, after watching Thierry refuse to seal anything during a waxing crescent, I'm starting to think they took it pretty seriously. We carry the jar back to a cluster of others, each buried halfway into the warm earth. There's a gentle slope to the ground here, like a natural cellar. The jars lean into one another, their sealed mouths poking out like turtle heads. It's oddly adorable. Some jars are marked with lines carved into the clay. Others have beads tied around the neck. Thierry explains that each symbol tells a story who made it what's inside when it was sealed. One even has a feather stuck in the mud cap, which apparently means do not open unless you enjoy dancing alone under the stars and waking up next to a goat. Duly noted. I ask about the herbs she sprinkled on the seal. Secrets, she says. I wait. Fine, she sighs. Mint wild basil and a little crushed ant nest. Excuse me? The ants make it bitter, she says. Keeps the spirits from drinking it while we sleep. Sure. Spirits. Definitely not just ants being extremely confused about their new living situation. Thierry lets me try sealing a jar myself. It does not go well. My mud is too wet. The top starts to slide off like jelly on a hot day. I try again. Still slippery. Finally, I pack it tighter and slap it down with more force than grace. It looks terrible. Ugly, she says, but functional. I'll take it. We leave the jars in their cool, shaded hollow and sit beneath a low tree where bees buzz lazily overhead. A few children wander by and poke at the seals, giggling when the mud sticks to their fingers. Don't let them break the seals, Thierry warns. What happens if they do? She shrugs. You drink it anyway. But maybe with your eyes closed. Another elder tells me about a man who sealed his jars using river clay mixed with crushed garlic. Claimed it made the drink speak truths. I ask what kind of truths. He divorced his wife and married his cousin's sister's midwife. Okay then, the process of sealing isn't just practical, it's symbolic. It marks the transition from active brewing to patient waiting, from doing to hoping, from stirring to trusting. It's like writing a letter to the future and then sticking it in the oven. And honestly, there's something comforting about that. About knowing that once the jar is sealed, your job is to wait, to give nature time to do her chaotic, beautiful thing. I ask if anyone ever checks on the jars before the right day. Thierry gives me a look like I just asked if fish can sing. Of course not. You don't open a dream before it's finished. Fair point. That night, we sit by the fire. The sealed jars rest nearby, glistening in the orange glow. They look like silent guests at a party, waiting, listening. Someone starts a story about a jar that cracked during a thunderstorm and began singing. Not a melody, just a tone. A hum that made the chickens stop clucking and the dogs hide under mats. They buried that jar deep in the hills far from the village. Bad batch, I ask. No, says an old woman with a smile. Too good, too alive. And that, I think, might be the best review any wine has ever received. The path to the caves is narrow and half forgotten, the kind of trail that seems to exist only because people keep walking it out of habit, not need. Thierry leads the way, a woven basket bouncing against her hip, filled with tools I don't recognize, a bone spoon, a curved knife, and a dried fish skin folded like a letter. I ask what it's for. Scraping ghosts? Off the wall, she says with a perfectly straight face. Then winks. Or cleaning jars. Depends on the day. We duck under branches and step around stones shaped like forgotten faces. The air cools as we descend into the shaded ravine, and before long, I hear it, the soft echo of dripping water, steady and patient, like the cave is breathing through its nose. Inside, the walls are smooth and damp. Lichen glows faintly in patches, painting the stone with ghost light. I trail my fingers along the wall and feel tiny grooves like someone tried to write with a toothpick and too much confidence. Thierry lights a small oil lamp and the whole space shifts. Shadows dance. Shapes emerge. We're standing in a place few people visit anymore. An old fermentation cave where ancient brewers once stored their strongest, most persuasive jars. Not just because of the cool temperature and still air, but because, according to legend, this is where the honey wine began to whisper. I'm not even kidding. She shows me a rock shelf with 7 small indentations, each one clearly designed to cradle a rounded jar. The ceiling above them is covered in marks. Some are swirls, others simple X's or zigzags. One looks suspiciously like a chicken on roller skates. Tyree calls it ancestor shorthand. Each mark meant something, she says. Moon day, rain week, loud bees. She points to one particular symbol, a triangle inside a circle surrounded by dots. This one, she says, means don't drink while angry. I ask if anyone ever did. Oh yes, he tried to fight a waterfall. Right. Historians still debate whether these marks were true calendars, fermentation notes, or just ceremonial graffiti carved by bored apprentices with a little too much free time and a chisel. But one thing's for sure, they recorded something. Even if that something was just, this batch made me talk to a tree. Tiri kneels beside a pile of broken pottery. She picks up a shard and holds it to the lamp. See this, she says, pointing to a reddish line etched near the rim. This meant it was fire brewed, heated before sealing. Stronger dreams. She hands me the shard. It's heavier than I expect. Almost warm, like it remembers being useful. Farther in, we find a section of wall that's blackened from years of smoke. Along it are tiny holes where shelves once hung. This was the brewer's workbench. Tyree places her basket down and begins laying out her tools. She hums to herself, not a song exactly, more like a lullaby for old jars. She pulls out a small jar from the basket only about the size of a coconut. This one's mine, she says. I started it 3 moons ago. The seal is wrapped in what looks like silk, but when I touch it, it's bark paper thin and fragrant. She unties it slowly, reverently. The smell that escapes is rich, deep, like honey and smoke had a slow conversation by candlelight. She pours a little into a shallow stone cup and hands it to me. Careful, she says. It remembers things. I sip. My entire mouth goes warm. Not hot. Warm, like being wrapped in a blanket you didn't know you needed. The taste is layered honey, yes, but also stone fruit, dry herbs, and something like charred orange peel. It's sweet, but not sugary. It's thoughtful. It lingers. I blink. Did the cave just get quieter? Tiri just smiles. Odd fact. Some early Ethiopian brewers believed that certain caves amplified the voice of the wine. They claimed that if you left a jar in the right spot, facing the right wall, at the right angle, it would learn to speak better. Whether this means flavor fermentation or hallucinations is still up for debate. I take another sip, and suddenly I feel like I understand time. Not in a useful way, just in a this cave was here before calendars kind of way. We sit in silence for a while, the lamp flickering low. Around us, the walls are filled with the stories of people who turned honey into more than sweetness. They turned it into memory, into message, into magic. Eventually, Tiri begins scraping one of the rock shelves with the fish skin. Not for ghosts, it turns out. For moss. Too much moss, and the jars slip, she explains. One slipped last season. It was the singing one. Ah, so that's where it went. Before we leave, she places her little jar back on the shelf. But not the same shelf she took it from. A higher one. A promotion, maybe. A reward for not exploding or attracting ghosts. We step out of the cave as the sun begins to dip behind the hills, and the warmth of the outside world hits me like a sigh. Back in the village, the air smells like cooked grain and fresh dung, comforting in its own rustic way. But I can't stop thinking about the cool breath of the cave. The walls full of forgotten symbols. The taste of a drink that seemed to listen as much as speak. Tiri pats my back. Tomorrow, she says we learn about bees that don't sting. I look at her. They just judge. Of course they do. I'm standing at the edge of a wooden platform that smells like wax and wildflowers, and directly in front of me is a woman wearing bees. Not like wearing bees accidentally. No, this is deliberate. She's draped in golden cloth that glimmers like pollen in the sun, and around her neck hangs a necklace of dried honeycombs, each threaded carefully with tiny beads. Her headdress is woven with beeswax, shaped into coils that frame her face like a glowing crown, and on her left shoulder, an actual bee is just chilling, not buzzing, not panicking, just sitting there like it paid rent. This is the queen of the hive. No one calls her that officially, but everyone in the village knows she runs the show when it comes to honey. Her name is Mazeret, and she doesn't just gather honey, she commands it. She walks among rows of hive baskets stacked like small grain silos, each one pulsing gently with life. I can hear the hum before I even get close. It's not loud, it's velvety, like the sound of a lullaby being sung from behind a curtain. Mazeret turns to me and smiles. "Be calm," she says. "They smell nervous." That's not terrifying at all. She hands me a bundle of smoldering herbs, dried leaves, tied with twine, and shows me how to wave it slowly near the hive's entrance. The smoke curls like lazy snakes, and almost instantly, the bees inside begin to quiet. This doesn't make them sleep, she explains, just makes them forget why they were angry. A valuable life skill, honestly. The hive baskets themselves are made from woven reeds and mud coated in thick layers of clay and sealed with surprise goat dung. I raise an eyebrow. "Strongest seal we have," she says, completely serious. "Rainproof, snake-proof, mother-in-law proof. I don't ask which of those is most dangerous." Mazeret lifts the lid of one basket with the casual grace of someone who's done this 1,000 times. Inside, the honeycomb glistens golden and sticky with a fragrance that's somehow both floral and musky. The bees crawl over her hands like she's a familiar tree. One lands on her forehead, stays a second, then flies off. "They remember me," she says, without a trace of arrogance. "I fed their grandmothers." Historians still debate whether ancient Ethiopian beekeepers actually tamed bees or simply created environments that encouraged wild colonies to return. But here, watching Mazeret gently scoop comb into a bowl, I'm convinced she's part bee herself. She tells me about the guild, an informal group of women who control the honey trade in the region. They're not just gatherers. They're guardians, trainers, story keepers. Each one knows which flowers are blooming, which hives are angry, and which jars are fermenting best. They pass this knowledge down, like recipes by whisper, by mistake, by repetition. Mazeret's apprentice is a girl no older than 10, already wearing a small pouch of wax on her hip like a badge. She shows me how to test the thickness of honey by letting it drip onto a rock and watching how slowly it spreads. "Too fast," she says, and the wine will hiss. "Too slow. Then you're eating a candle." Noted. Odd fact. In some parts of ancient Ethiopia, people believed the queen bee wasn't just a symbol of fertility, but a literal messenger of the gods. If a hive swarmed your house, it meant you'd been chosen. For what? Well, depends on how polite you were to your bees. As Mazeret leads me deeper into the grove, I notice something else her bees have zones. There's a calm hive for apprentice practice, a storm hive which buzzes louder and produces darker, almost smoky honey. And then there's a hidden hive behind a fallen tree, which she simply calls the secret. She doesn't take me there. "Not for today," she says, "but now I want to know everything." She lets me try lifting one of the full baskets. It's heavy, shockingly heavy. The honey, the comb, the bees, all dense with purpose. I nearly drop it. "Don't spill a drop," she warns. "Every bee worked for that. Some died." Suddenly, I'm holding it like a priceless artifact. We carry the baskets back to her hut, where she heats a flat stone and begins pressing the combs against it. The honey flows slowly into a groove carved into the rock, where it collects into a clay bowl lined with fresh leaves. It smells divine, like breakfast in heaven. Mazeret bottles some of it in small gourd flasks for medicine. The rest goes to fermentation. She adds herbs. I've never seen one that smells like pepper, another like pine, and stirs the mix with a carved spoon shaped like a horned snake. Every brew needs a little bite, she says. I ask her how long she's been doing this. She doesn't answer, just lifts her hand and shows me 3 small scars neatly spaced on her palm like bites. Each scar a hive I saved, she says. That night, the beekeepers gather for what they call the tasting. They don't drink much, just a few sips from each jar, testing for texture, fizz, and flavor. They speak in metaphors. This one walks slow, or tastes like sun before rain. One woman tastes a jar and sighs. This is a widow's laugh. Another drinks and frowns. This one's still deciding. It's not scientific. It's better. They trust their mouths, their memories, their bees. Before bed, Mazeret hands me a jar with a small wax seal shaped like a bee's wing. This one's for dreams only, she says. Don't drink it while angry. Or I'll fight a waterfall, I joke. She nods. Or become one. I'm not sure if she's serious, but I wrap the jar carefully and sleep that night with it beside my head. And for the first time in a long while, I dream of golden hills humming wings and a voice whispering something in a language I almost understand. By the time I've managed to fall into a rhythm with these people, if you can even call their methodical chaos a rhythm, I start noticing how everything changes with the seasons. The honey doesn't just taste different, it behaves differently. Sometimes it's fast and eager to ferment, bubbling up like a gossiping cousin at a funeral. Other times it sits thick and stubborn in the jar, taking its sweet time like it knows you're waiting. Thierry tells me, some jars like the dry season. Some prefer the fog. We're standing on a small ridge, looking down at a terraced stretch of land where wildflowers bloom in precise chaos, pinks, oranges, and yellows brushing against tall grass. There's a hum in the air, and the bees are drunk on sunshine. Each season has its own flavor of honey. Spring honey is lighter, almost citrusy, thanks to the blooming acacia trees. Summer honey is dense and amber-rich, thick like syrup that's been thinking too hard. And autumn honey is smoky, not from fire, just from the air somehow. And with each variation in honey, the wine that follows dances differently on your tongue. Today, we're collecting a batch made under the last full moon, fermented through cold nights and warm, misty mornings. The villagers call this moon the laughing one, because it always seems to rise with a crooked grin. And apparently jars sealed under it are known for making people laugh uncontrollably after 2 sips. There's a man sitting on a stone nearby doing exactly that. No cup in sight. Just giggling like the clouds are telling jokes. I point him out. Thierry just nods 3rd sip. Historically, Ethiopian brewers often align their brewing and sealing schedules with the lunar calendar. Some believe it's to do with temperature shifts. Others say it's about pull, as if the moon can tug on your jars the same way it pulls the tides. Historians still debate whether these practices were rooted in observation or pure superstition. But when you live in a place where the moon stares down at you like a curious neighbor every night, it starts to feel personal. We walk past a row of jars half buried in the earth. Each has a stick leaning against it, carved with a different set of notches. Breathing sticks, Thierry calls them. They mark the days since sealing. If the stick falls, it means the jar is finished, unless the wind knocks it over, In which case, you get a surprise party in your mouth. Odd fact. Some villagers say you can hear when a jar is ready, not by opening it, but by placing your ear to the lid and listening. If it hums gently, like someone breathing through their nose, it's time. If it hisses or moans, give it a few more days. Or run. I try it. One jar sounds like a wet sigh. Another sounds like nothing. Then I find one that makes a soft tick, 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 like a heartbeat with stage fright. Tyree listens too and smiles. That one's a talker. We take it back to the central hut where a small fire is burning low. The nights are getting cooler now. You can feel it in your fingers in the way people start wrapping their shoulders with thicker cloth. Bees cling to warmth like tiny fuzzy philosophers. We pour a little of the new batch into a horn cup. The color is nearly bronze. It shimmers in the firelight. I sip. It's strange, not bad, just unexpected, sweet up front. But then comes this wave of something herbal, almost like mint, but earthier. Then a dryness that settles at the back of the tongue and makes you want to whistle. Moon Age, Thierry says, as if that explains it all. The flavor, the texture, even the feeling of it shifts with the weather. Some jars are said to ferment faster. During thunder, others prefer fog. One elder tells me that lightning storms give wine personality. I ask what that means. Means it doesn't apologize. Under the changing sky, the whole village seems to adjust its pace. In spring, they brew in the open, laughing loud and sealing jars with songs. In the rainy months, everything gets quieter. Jars are hidden, deeper sealed, with more herbs. Rain makes the ghosts hungrier. Thierry tells me, eyes half-lidded. I don't ask follow-ups. One night, a celebration breaks out, not for any reason I can figure. Maybe the jars turned out well. Maybe someone had a baby. Maybe a goat stopped chewing on important things. But there's dancing, singing, and more wine than I've seen since I arrived. Everyone's holding a cup. Everyone's wearing flowers in their hair or tucked behind their ear. A group of teenagers performs a skit where the bees are characters. One's a priest, one's a jealous brother, and one's just drunk. It ends with a loud buzz and everyone clapping. I laugh until I hiccup. The jar I'm drinking from has a sticker. Well, not a sticker, but a clay tag with a tiny face etched into it. It's smiling. The wine is too. It's light, easy, playful. The kind that makes your knees feel like they're being tickled from the inside. Later, when the fire dies down and people start drifting toward sleep, I sit by the jars again. They rest in the earth like slow, dreaming creatures, breathing, changing, becoming. It strikes me that the seasons haven't just shaped the honey or the wine. They've shaped the people too, their patience, their joy, their stories. And in every jar, there's a little bit of the sky that sealed it, a little bit of the breeze that cooled it, a little bit of the moon that watched over it. I take one last sip and close my eyes. Somewhere in the dark, I swear I hear a jar laughing. It's a quiet morning. No drums, no goat ballet. Just the sound of wind brushing through the trees and the occasional snort from a donkey who sounds as annoyed as I feel when waking up too early. Thierry meets me by the gate wearing black. Not deep funeral black, more like charcoal smudged with clay. Her hair is tied back tight, and she hands me a small jar wrapped in woven bark. "We're going to say goodbye," she says. I follow her and a few others out of the village and up a sloping path through golden grass that waves at us like gossiping neighbors. We walk for maybe an hour, no one speaking much, until we reach a grove of crooked trees. Beneath one of them is a mound of earth, round and smooth and carefully swept clean of leaves. A grave. Someone has carved a spiral pattern into the packed soil, and near the top sits a bowl of fruit gone soft with time and heat. 2 bees hover lazily above it, like they're paying respects. Tiri kneels and places the small jar near the base of the mound. Then she unseals it, lets the lid rest beside the opening, and pours a slow stream of honey wine directly onto the dirt. The scent rises instantly, sweet, sharp, and golden. "We feed the ones who fed us," she says quietly, "so they don't forget the taste of joy." I sit beside her jar in hand, not quite sure what to do. She takes a small sip from her own, and then gestures for me to do the same. I do. It tastes different out here. Softer, maybe. The air seems to hold it longer, as if the trees themselves are remembering something. Odd fact. Ancient Ethiopians believed honey had preservative properties, not just for the body, but for the soul. Some grave sites have been found with honey jars, still sealed, buried alongside the dead as sustenance for the afterlife. Whether it's literal or symbolic, the point is the same. Honey was life, and wine was memory. This ritual, this quiet pouring of fermented sweetness into the earth, isn't just mourning. It's reunion. Historians still debate whether these practices were spiritual offerings or simply traditions that made mourning feel more communal. But sitting there watching the wine sink into the soil like it's being welcomed, I start to believe it's both. One man older than the hills we walked across begins to hum. No words, just a tune, low and slow. The kind of melody you don't sing, you breathe. Others join in until the grove is filled with a gentle harmony that doesn't try to impress, just lingers like mist. They call it shakora, a farewell song. It's only sung when wine is poured for the dead, and never the same way twice. I feel something shift in me. Not grief, not quite, but a kind of quiet understanding that life-like fermentation is a slow transformation. That sweetness can last long after we're gone. If we bottle it carefully, if we share it freely. Later as we walk back, I ask Tiri, who was buried there. "My sister," she says simply. I wait. She liked the storm jars, said the hiss made her laugh. We don't talk much more after that. We don't need to. That evening, the village is still. No festivals, no clapping. Just the soft clink of clay against clay as people check their jars, stir their mixtures, whisper to their lids. I sit outside Mazeret's hut, and she brings me a small dish of fruit figs and something citrusy that puckers my entire mouth. She watches me with amusement and then sets down 2 cups and a new jar. "This one's for remembering," she says. "It's aged longer than most. The seal is darker brittle at the edges." She cracks it gently, and the aroma is deeper than anything I've smelled so far. Not just sweet earthy, like moss that tells stories. We each pour a cup and drink slowly. The taste is warm bitter on the back of the tongue, and then soft, like smoke curling around honey. It settles in my chest. "That one's made with funeral honey," she says. I blink. She explains that after certain ceremonies, any leftover honey used in the rites is collected and set aside, used to make a specific batch of wine. One that's only drunk on days of remembrance. Never for celebration. Never for fun. I take another sip and close my eyes. In the silence, I feel the memory of this place wrap around me. The sound of bees, the laughter of dancers, the hiss of jars being unsealed, the whisper of names spoken into clay. The honey wine isn't just something to drink. It's something to feel, to carry, to pour, even when no one's watching. Especially then, there's a commotion near the edge of the village, the kind that crackles in the air before you even know what's wrong. Voices raised, feet running, the unmistakable clang of a dropped clay jar. I follow the noise and find a crowd gathered around 3 outsiders. They look like traders, their tunics dyed in unfamiliar colors, their faces sun-beaten and suspicious. One of them is holding a cracked pot in his hands, the lid dangling by a wet string wine, leaking down the sides like a melted candle. Mazeret is there. So is Thierry. And neither of them looks pleased. The tallest outsider is waving his arms wildly, insisting he didn't do anything wrong. We followed the instructions, he says in a heavy accent. Same jars, same honey, same leaves, but not the same waiting Mazeret snaps. You opened it early. We didn't want it to go sour. It wanted to go sour, she mutters. The villagers are whispering among themselves, peeking into the jar. I take a cautious step forward, and the smell hits me like a wet slap, sour burnt, with a sharpness that makes my teeth itch. This is not wine. This is a warning. Thierry leans close and sighs. They stole the recipe, but not the rhythm. Apparently, the outsiders had snuck into the village weeks ago under the guise of traders. They watched, they listened, and then they left without saying goodbye, something that in this culture is as rude as spitting in a jar. They tried to replicate the honey wine elsewhere, built similar hives, collected similar herbs, but something went wrong. Maybe the bees were different, maybe the soil, maybe the sky, or maybe they just didn't respect the quiet parts, the waiting, the sealing, the whispers. Odd fact. There's a term in the village language, phenomena, which means the spirit of waiting. It doesn't translate cleanly, but the idea is that certain things must take their time or they unravel. You can't rush a dream. You can't skip the silence between heartbeats. Historians still debate whether ancient brewing failures like this were common or if they're just cautionary tales meant to keep traditions local. But watching this unfold, it's clear some things are not meant to be hurried or stolen. Mazeret takes the spoiled jar, places it gently on the ground, and covers it with a flat stone. We won't bury it, she says. Let it sit. Let the bees decide. The outsiders are allowed to stay the night, but only outside the inner circle. No wine, no stories, no fire. Just time to sit and listen to the wind, which is perhaps the most generous punishment of all. That evening, the village gathers quietly not to celebrate, but to reaffirm. They bring out jars with old markings. Some are cracked, some sealed with age-softened wax. They open them one by one, testing, tasting, remembering. It's like checking in with old friends. One jar lets out a low hiss like a sigh of relief. Another fizzes gently, like it had been holding a joke this whole time. And one explodes. Not violently, just a soft pop, and the lid flies off like a startled bird. Foam spills down the side, and everyone laughs. Thierry claps her hands and declares that one was holding secrets. No one's mad. It's part of the risk, part of the story. They tell me about other failed batches from long ago, one that turned black and made everyone who drank it speak backward for a day. Another that tasted like onions but made people dream in poetry. Failures, yes, but memorable ones. I sip from a jar marked with a crescent moon and 3 dots. It's sharp, tart, and oddly calming, like biting into a lemon after meditating. These jars, Mazeret says they learn who you are. What does this one know about me, I ask. She smiles. That you don't listen enough. But you try. Fair. Odd fact. Some jars were believed to develop personalities, not just because of their flavor, but because of how they behaved during fermentation. One elder swears she had a jar that growled at her cousin. He never came back to visit. The jars tonight are not just containers. They're characters, friends, sometimes villains. One young man tells a story about a jar that leaked every night at midnight, but only during thunderstorms. We called it the widow, he says, because it wept. Someone passes around slices of roasted yam drizzled with fresh honey. It cuts through the acidity of the stronger wines. Another dish appears, flatbread soaked in a milder brew, eaten slowly, ceremonially. The mood softens. By now, the outsiders have quietly approached the fire, their faces humbler. They sit just outside the circle, watching, learning. One of them removes his shoes, a small gesture but meaningful. He doesn't ask to drink. He doesn't try to explain. He just listens. And that, I think, is the start of forgiveness. As the embers glow low and people begin to drift into sleep, I sit with Thierry one last time beside the row of sealed jars. We light a candle and set it in front of a particularly old one. The wax flickers. The clay gleams. What happens if all the jars go sour? I ask. She doesn't hesitate. Then we start again. New honey, new hands, same patience. There's comfort in that. In knowing that even when something fails, the tradition doesn't. It waits, it watches, and it begins again. The sun rises red the next morning, thick and heavy, like it was fermented overnight and poured too quickly into the sky. The village wakes slowly, stretching out of its sleep, like a cat from warm sand. People go about their routines, checking on jars, brushing bees off their shoulders like tiny shoulder ghosts cooking flatbread over shallow fires. But today, I'm not staying put. I've been invited to join a trade caravan. Not as a trader. Of course, I don't know how to price a yam, let alone a jar of spirit-kissed honey wine, but as an observer, a guest. An honorary cup holder, if you will. The leader of the caravan is a man called Obo. He's broad-shouldered, wears too many rings, and hums constantly like he's tuning an instrument only he can hear. His camel is older than most grandparents, and probably grumpier, but it carries its load of sealed honey wine jars like it's been doing it since birth. Obo tells me the jars are wrapped in goat hair, padded with woven mats, and packed into saddlebags lined with dried leaves. Keeps the wine calm, he says. Wine gets agitated, I ask. He nods. Oh, yes. Like babies. Shake them too much, they turn bitter. A few other villagers help load the jars, each one carefully chosen. Some are for trade, others for gifting. One jar is tightly sealed with red-dyed wax and no label. What's that one, I ask. Obo lowers his voice. That one's a whisper. Apparently, certain brews are so prized, so secret, they're never opened in public. They're passed quietly between hands, behind curtains, tasted only in trusted silence. Recipes for these are never written, only whispered. Historians still debate whether these whisper wines were ever real or just village folklore wrapped in mystery. But as the camel bell jingles and we head out into the wild, I can't help but hope it's true. The caravan moves like a long exhale across the landscape. We pass dusty hills, thorny shrubs, a few curious goats, and one monkey who looks personally offended that we didn't stop to chat. At each stop, Obo lays out mats and small flasks. Traders from other regions arrive with goods, salt grain woven cloth, dried fish. They don't speak the same language, but everyone understands the ritual. One trader wrapped in blue linen bows, low before sampling a honey wine. He sips, swishes, closes his eyes. Fire in a velvet glove, he says in his own tongue. Someone translates. Obo beams. The trade is smooth. A bundle of salt for 3 flasks. 2 pieces of dyed fabric for a jar with a yellow wax seal. No one argues. Everyone tastes. Odd fact. These honey wines were among the earliest trade liquors in this part of the world. While northern civilizations shipped amphorae of grape wine, Ethiopians carried clay-stored honey brews by camelback, across valleys, up mountains, down rivers, each jar wrapped like a baby, each recipe whispered like sin. We stop for the night in a small camp surrounded by acacia trees. Fires burn low. Camels grumble in unison like they've formed a union. I sit with Obo and a few others around a jar marked with a white feather. "This one is for peace," he says. "Drink it when words are hard." We each sip. It's light, nearly floral, with a softness that makes the silence feel full rather than awkward. Someone hums a tune. Someone else tosses a stone into the fire, making it hiss and pop. Obo begins, telling stories of past trades gone wrong, of jars dropped and lost, of one trader who tried to mix two brews together and ended up forgetting his own name for a week. "He still makes good wine," Obo adds, "just not great conversation." In the flickering firelight, I notice something subtle. Each time someone pours, they flick a drop onto the ground first. "For the spirits," Obo explains, "so they don't feel left out." I follow suit. Later, as most drift off to sleep, I lie awake staring at the stars. They're impossibly clear out here, like pinholes in a dark curtain. I think about the jars, tied to camelbacks, sloshing gently with every step. About the trade routes that wind like veins through these hills. About the flavors that change with elevation. Seasoned storyteller. This drink, this honey wine, it isn't just liquid. It's lineage. It moves not just from place to place, but from person to person. Whispered, sipped, shared. Before I drift off, Obo taps my shoulder and hands me a tiny flask. "Not to drink," he says, "just to carry. Let it remember your journey." Inside is a pale golden wine, almost translucent. He sealed it himself. No label, no mark. I tie it to my belt and fall asleep, with bees humming in my dreams, camels walking in my heartbeat, and the strange comfort of knowing that some stories are meant to be carried more than told. We return to the village just before dusk, dust clinging to our clothes, and the faint aroma of salt and camel sweat following close behind. People greet us with curious glances and half smiles, eager to know what was traded, what stories were gathered, and more importantly, whether any jars came back speaking in new flavors. But tonight, the mood is different. There's tension in the air, light and crackling like the space before a storm. The king is here, not a king. The king, he's not from this village, but from the highlands beyond the river, where mountains scrape the clouds and people wear cloaks stitched with copper thread. His caravan arrived hours before we did. Dozens of guards' horses that don't understand goats and banners dyed the color of dried blood. His tent rises like a wound on the village field, twice the size of Mazeret's entire hut. From it, music drifts. Too perfect, too polished, lacking the charming messiness of reed flutes and goat drums. Thierry pulls me aside. They want to impress him with honey wine, with everything. Apparently, the king heard of the village's legendary brews and demanded a tasting. Not requested, demanded. And when kings demand, things get complicated. A long table has been set near the fire pit, covered in reed mats and pottery arranged like soldiers. The villagers have brought out their best jars, sealed under eclipses, stirred with sacred spoons, kissed by bees that only sting once. Obo, fresh from the road, places a red-sealed jar at the center. The king, dressed in layers of embroidered silk and a ring on every finger, lifts his cup like he's doing everyone a favor just by being here. He sips. His face is unreadable. For a moment, the entire village holds its breath. Then, a smile. The king nods. "Sweet," he says, but soft. The smile tightens. Mazeret steps forward, her arms crossed, and opens her own jar. The scent floods the air, smoky, sharp, honeyed, with something wild underneath. She pours a single drop into the king's cup and steps back. He sips again. Silence. Then, "This," he says, "is real wine." The village exhales like a room unclenching. But now comes the real game. Each noble at the king's side begins pouring their own flasks. Foreign brews, expensive wines, carried across deserts, fermented in temples, aged in oak. Each one, passed around, tasted, compared. One noble offers a drink laced with cinnamon and something that tastes like rose petals and regret. Another brings out a glowing green liquor that makes my eyebrows sweat. Then comes the jar no one wants. A man in the king's service, slim, with a face like wet stone, uncorks a flask with a grin too sharp to be friendly. This one, he says, we brewed from the whisper you stole. Everyone freezes. Obo stands up. Thierry's eyes go dark. Mazeret doesn't blink. Apparently, the spoiled batch from before wasn't just a mistake, it was a theft. The king's men tried to reproduce the village's sacred brew using one of the secret ingredients. It failed. But now they've brought their version here, and they're calling it theirs. It's poured. The king sips. He coughs, then laughs. Lively, he says, wiping his mouth, but untrained. And just like that, the mood softens. Tension eases. Pride is wounded, but not shattered. Then comes the toast. The king stands. Everyone stands. He raises his cup high. To the bees, he says, may they keep their secrets, even from kings. A clever line. Everyone laughs. But behind the smiles, something sharp lingers. Odd fact. Royal courts in ancient Ethiopia often involved ceremonial tastings of local brews. But these events weren't just about flavor. They were subtle power plays. The ability to brew something rare, something memorable that was influence. To serve it at court was to declare yourself a master of time, patience, and land. Historians still debate whether kings truly respected village brewers or merely used them for spectacle. But here tonight, I can see it. This is not just wine. It's diplomacy, a liquid language of alliance and warning. Later, as the nobles retreat to their tents and the king rests in his silks, the villagers gather again. Quiet this time, under starlight. Mazeret pours a drink for the earth. Thierry drops wax into the fire. Obo hums a song I've never heard before. Someone mutters, even kings forget how to listen. I take out the little flask Obo gave me, uncork it, not to drink, just to smell. It's different now, sharper, like it's grown since I last opened it. Maybe it learned something on the road. Maybe it's just breathing with the land. But I realize something else. This isn't just about who makes the wine. It's about who understands it, who respects the jar, the bees, the silence between sips. The king may have smiled. He may have toasted, but the wine knows, and the wine doesn't forget. The king leaves before sunrise. No ceremony, no final toast. Just a trail of dust and hooves and a sleeping village, waking to silence where there was once swagger. Someone finds a broken flute left behind in the field, and no one claims it. Back in the village, things return to their rhythm, sort of. There's a quiet pride, lingering like a jar that didn't hiss when opened. The wine held its ground. The secrets remained safe. And even kings, it seems, know when to step back. Today, I'm headed to the monastery. It's not far, just up the ridge beyond the acacia grove where the path narrows and the wind whispers slower. The building is carved partially into the rock, half cave, half clay, with wooden beams that creak like thoughtful knees. A bell dangles from the top, made from a melted cooking pot and a stolen goat collar. Brother Ialo greets me at the entrance. Thin, tall, with a beard that curves like a question mark, and a pair of ink-stained hands that never stop moving. He smells like beeswax and roasted grain. Come to learn or to nap, he asks. Both, I answer honestly. Inside the monastery is dim and wonderful. Stacks of manuscripts lean against the walls like tired elders. The air smells of old paper frankincense and just the faintest hint of honey. A fire crackles low in the corner, and somewhere deep in the shadows, A scribe is mumbling at a stubborn paragraph. The monks here copy religious texts, long winding sacred documents passed down over generations. But here's the twist. They sip honey wine while they work. Not much. Just enough to soften the hand, Brother Aiello says. Makes the letters flow. I sit beside him as he dips a long feathered quill into ink and drags it across vellum with the confidence of someone who's rewritten the same story 100 times and still enjoys the plot. Next to his elbow sits a small cup. The wine inside is pale thin, almost clear. This is writing wine, he says. If you drink too much, your pages blur. If you drink too little, your soul does. He offers me a sip. I take it. It's mild, almost disappointingly so. Like someone whispered honey into a bowl of warm water. But it's smooth, gentle. It settles the nerves and sharpens the edges of thought. Suddenly I want to write, or at least draw a really expressive chicken. Odd fact. Some ancient manuscripts from Ethiopian monasteries contain tiny marginalia, little drawings in the corners added by scribes when the wine got just slightly too strong. Bees with halos, goats and capes. One monk even drew a full battle between ants and honey jars. It's all there in ink faded by time, but not forgotten. Historians still debate whether these doodles were approved, tolerated, or just quietly ignored. But Brother Aiello laughs as he shows me one in the back of a prayer book. A bee wearing spectacles lecturing a group of grapes. That one's mine, he says proudly. We spend the morning in quiet. Just the scratching of quills, the occasional frustrated sigh, and the clink of a clay cup being refilled. I notice how often the monks pause not to think, but to sip. It's like punctuation for the soul. At midday, the bells ring once. Lunch is flatbread lentils and a drizzle of thick honey. No wine. We don't dream on a full stomach, Aiello says. Afterward, he shows me the fermentation room. Yes, the monastery has a fermentation room. It's small, cold, and lined with jars marked in neat, consistent symbols. No feathers or frogs here, just moons, lines, and numbers. Scientific almost. But the air still buzzes with that familiar scent. Sweet, deep, a little dangerous. We age our brews here, he explains. Some for drinking, some for rituals. And one, he taps a jar sealed with red wax and a cross only for deathbeds. It's not morbid, it's reverent. That jar is opened only when someone's final breath is near. A single sip, a final warmth. A reminder that sweetness exists even in goodbye. Back in the scriptorium, I ask him why monks keepers of holy words would drink during their work. Because God is in patience, he says, but he is also in pleasure, in taste, in memory. If you forget sweetness, you forget why the words matter. Later, I sit outside under a fig tree while a younger monk recites verses to a melody I don't recognize. He holds a small cup in one hand, his other gesturing in rhythm. The wine, the words, the melody, they braid together. And I realize something. This honey wine doesn't just travel in jars. It lives in books, in songs, in the laughter scratched into the corners of sacred scrolls. It lives in monks who whisper blessings into their brews, in bees who drift through stained glass windows and never sting the holy. It lives in patience, and it lives in stories. Before I leave, Brother Aiello presses a folded piece of parchment into my hand. It's a recipe, but not just any recipe. His own, 3 parts honey, 1 part well water, crushed sage leaves, a sliver of dried fig, and 1 full breath from the chest before sealing. I promise to try it. He shakes his head. No, don't try it. Wait for it. Let it teach you. And just like that, I step back into the sun, feeling like I've been taught by ghosts, bees, and books all at once. I return to the village with the parchment recipe tucked safely in my bag and the taste of that monastery wine still clinging to my memory like a warm whisper. The bees greet me before the people do, drifting lazily around my head like tiny librarians checking if I remembered to return what I borrowed. By now, I've learned how to listen better, and today I'm listening to foreigners struggle to describe the thing they just drank. A group of travelers, merchants, mostly has arrived from the north. They wear woven cloaks, dyed with unfamiliar patterns, carry bundles of dried herbs, and speak with the musical rhythm of a different tongue. They've heard of the village wine. They want to try it. Of course they do. Maserhet agrees, but under one condition: they must describe what they taste. Seems easy enough until the first sip. One merchant, a tall man with a scar over his eyebrow, swirls the cup like he knows what he's doing. He sniffs. He sips. He coughs once and then says, "It's like sunshine got tired and laid down in a flower." Everyone stares. Another tries. It tastes like a fruit that had a secret, not exactly helpful. Eventually, someone blurts out, "Is it wine, mead, beer?" Maserhet just smiles. "Yes," and walks away. The truth is, even locals don't fully agree on what this drink is. It's made from honey like mead. It's fermented like wine. But sometimes it's brewed with grain or bark or fruit which leans toward beer. The process is ancient, the outcome unpredictable, and the language to describe it limited. Odd fact: there are scrolls even in early trade documents where Ethiopian honey wine is referred to as shadow wine, jungle mead, or sun beer, depending on who's translating. The problem is not just that the drink defies categories, it's that each batch changes. Each sip is a fingerprint. Historians still debate what it should be called. And the villagers, they don't care. You drink it, Thierry says, or you don't. That's the name. But the foreigners insist on labels. They try writing it down. One of them sketches a little jar and writes Tej under it, adding a question mark like it's a maybe. Another draws a bee with angry eyebrows. Meanwhile, a child sneaks behind them and swaps two of their flasks. No one notices. I try explaining. I say it's fermented honey wine with herbal infusions often made in clay vessels buried underground. The merchant blinks. "So, mead?" "No." He tries again. "Like a rustic cider?" "No." "Like a sweet ale?" "Oh, no." "Then what is it?" I point to the jar. "It's this." That's the problem. Language wants categories. But honey wine doesn't. It wants stories. One of the travelers takes a sip and finally says, "It tastes like remembering something you didn't know you forgot." That one the villagers approve of. Later that evening, they try brewing their own batch. They borrow a small jar, add their own honey water and herbs from their homeland, but they seal it with a twist of linen, not bark. They store it near the cooking fire. They stir it wrong. And they forget to whisper to it. Maserhet finds it the next morning unbubbled, still, as lifeless as warm tea. She frowns and says this jar is sleeping, but no one told it to dream. They're confused. She doesn't explain. Odd fact: in many Ethiopian villages, jars are considered semi-living. They're named, spoken to, given time, treated with respect. When one breaks, it's mourned, buried, sometimes even given a short song. Because the jar didn't just hold wine, it helped become it. I ask if any foreigners ever got it right. Thierry thinks for a while, then shrugs. One woman, many seasons ago. She sat, watched, didn't touch anything, just listened, and she left behind a jar that still sings in the cave. So maybe understanding this drink doesn't come from naming it. Maybe it comes from surrendering to it. That night, as the travelers prepared to leave, one of them, an older man with soft eyes and a cracked thumbnail, asks if he can take a jar home. Obo looks at him carefully. Only if you promise not to explain it. The man nods. Not to your wife. Not to your neighbors. Not to your king. He nods again. Obo hands him a sealed jar. No label, no mark. Just a faint spiral pressed into the clay. The traveler holds it like something sacred. Back at the fire, Mazeret pours one last cup for the night. It's from a small jar, tied with dried reeds and a feather. It tastes like nothing I've had before, like fruit that's been burned into candy, like smoke that learned how to be sweet, like dusk. And for a moment I try to describe it. Then I stop, because maybe that's the point. Some flavors aren't meant to be explained. They're meant to be remembered. The jar is warm in my hands, not hot, just warm, like it's been thinking about something all day, and finally decided to tell me. It hums softly, or maybe that's just my pulse. I sit beside the last fire of the season. The villagers gathered in a loose circle, the stars out in full parade above us. This is it. My last night here. Turi hands me a fresh cup. No explanation. No warning. Just trust. The wine is golden with a hint of green, like it borrowed the color of wild grass after a storm. I sip. It tastes like the beginning. Like part one. Came back around still dusty, still humming with bees, but wiser now. Fuller. Around me, the villagers laugh, softly nudge each other, trade small stories. A few doze against woven baskets. Someone's baby sleeps in a sling made from honey-scented cloth. And the jars, oh the jars, they glow faintly in the firelight, like they've been listening this whole time. Mazeret sits nearby, her hands folded in her lap, her headdress loose for the first time. This batch, she says, was made from the last flowers before the drought. It carries the memory of rain. I nod. I can taste it. Odd fact. When the climate shifts, when rains arrive early or late, when the bees forage differently, everything in the jar changes. The honey bends to the land. The wine becomes a weather report in liquid form. One jar might taste like anxiety, another like celebration. Historians still debate whether these memory jars were ever deliberately coded or just the natural outcome of careful, seasonal brewing. But here, in this quiet moment, I know it's both. Tiri reaches into the basket beside her and pulls out a sealed jar. She presses it into my hands. It's smaller than the others. Heavier. For your next season, she says, don't open it too soon. I want to ask what's inside. I want to ask for instructions. But I already know better. Some jars don't need labels. Some jars just need time. The villagers begin to not a song, not exactly, but something close. A kind of shared breath, slow and patient. It winds around us like smoke, like memory, like a bee's trail through evening air. The fire pops. A goat sneezes in the dark. Someone chuckles softly, and it all just settles. I think about everything I've seen, the golden jars and bubbling pits, the funerals and festivals, the singing caves, the bees that judged without stinging, the queens who wore wax like armor, the monks who doodled drunk insects in the corners of sacred texts, the travelers who searched for definitions and the villagers who refused to offer any. And through it all, the jars kept whispering, kept waiting, kept becoming. I take one last sip and close my eyes. The warmth spreads down to my fingers. My breath slows, the stars blur. I hear the crackling of the fire, the clink of cups, the faint buzzing of a bee brushing past my ear, like it has something to tell me, but not tonight, not just yet. And that's when it hits me. This wasn't a drink. This was a lesson in patience, in presence, in not trying to name the beautiful thing too soon, in letting flavor be a story, not a summary. I lie back in the grass. The jar rests on my chest like a heartbeat. I think I'll carry it with me, wherever I go. So now, as the last jar cools in the earth and the bees return to their hives, let's breathe slower. Let's imagine the honey still flowing thick and steady from comb to bowl, from bowl to jar. Let's feel the rhythm of it slow, ancient, like a story told in sips instead of sentences. The night air wraps around your shoulders, now softer than you remember. The fire's nothing but a glow beneath the ash. The voices have faded into silence. Not an empty silence, but the full kind. The kind that comes after a good meal, a warm laugh, or a sip of something made with love and too much time. And in that silence, somewhere between your heartbeat and the crickets, maybe you still hear the jar. Breathing, waiting, holding the memory of a season of a smile, of a life spent in slow circles under a high sun. You're allowed to let go now. No more questions. No need to remember every detail. Just rest. Let the flavors blur. Let the words soften. Let the sleep come like warm honey pooling behind your eyes. You've earned it. Good night.